Shamayim varetz al yiten lamot raglecha al yanum shomrecha hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael Adonai Shomrecha Adonai Tzilcha Yad Yaminecha Yomam HaShemesh Lo Yakecha V'yareach Balayla Adonai Yishmorcha mikara Yishmor et nafshecha Adonai Yishmor tzeitcha ubacha me'ata ve'ad olam. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. Adonai guards our going and our coming now and forever. So, are you able to hear Ellie and Marilyn?
You talking to me?
Yes, can you hear us? Is the speaker working now? Not yet. I just want to make sure you can hear. Not yet. We're now going to say a blessing.
I can't hear you because there's something wrong with the phone.
Okay, so then we're going to wait just a moment until you... We'll wait just a moment. You guys can sit down
Okay.
first.
I don't know where Rabbi Lever is.
Okay, so we'll wait for Rabbi Lever and then we'll begin.
Can you see me all right?
Yes.
Can you see me all right? Okay. You can hear me all right because I got the mask on.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I texted my leader to come back to your room.
So we're just waiting on a minor technical issue at Toby Weinman. And once they can hear, we'll begin.
Let me know you want me to speak.
What I'd like to do in just a moment. Ellie, are you able to hear us? Ellie, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so what I want to do right now, while we're waiting for the speaker to come together, is to say a blessing. And I'm going to ask you all to repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Dayan.
Dayan.
Ha'emet.
Amen.
And now you should have the ribbon. Or Stacy and Matt and Sharon and Robin. If you have a ribbon or something to tear, this is the time to tear, and we'll all tear together.
Hear it now?
Just send another message to Toby Wyman. We'll see how we're doing. And then we'll begin in just a moment.
Do I just hear it?
So we are in a whole different world right now. We've got everyone here. We have oh wow, so that may be, you may have filled our capacity. We have 100 people signed on. So that may be, because I just got a message from someone saying they couldn't sign on, but that we did what we can do. So let us begin. In the words of Ecclesiastes, there is a season for everything. A time for dancing and a time for wailing. A time for birthing and a time for dying. A time for speaking and a time for silence. The time of mourning is one of great challenge, and to be mourning in this time is, there are no words for this moment. To see you here, people who I care about, and to stand here at a distance and not to be able to give a hug is heartbreaking. And to know that Ellie, you are there, and Robin, you are there, and Stacy, you are there, and Sharon, you are there, and Matt, you're there, and 100 other people are there who don't want to be there, they want to be here. It's heartbreaking. And we have to acknowledge the challenge and the pain of this moment that is from the global challenge as much as the challenge of this moment from a spiritual experience of losing Dr. Mitchell LeVine, who we care so deeply about. I think the best way for us to begin, before I continue with Psalms, and is to ask Ellie to share a few words. And I'm going to turn her around so that way you guys can see her. So Ellie, now you can go ahead.
I'm at Mitchell LeVine in Chicago. Our first date was February 15th, 1978. Our engagement was April 22nd and marriage on September 3rd of that year. Mitchell proved to be a wonderful and devoted husband, son, and father, a trustworthy companion, a skilled surgeon, and overall genius and Renaissance man. Life with Mitchell was never boring. Quite the contrary, each day was full of lively and fun surprises. I am deeply saddened by his passing and my loss, but I am comforted by the fact that he is at peace and no longer suffering. To my Mitchie honey, please know that you have always been and always will be the love of my life. I will cherish the fond memories of our days together and with our 6 kids. I bid you farewell, but you should know that you will be in my heart forever and ever.
And Rabbi Lever, since you're right there, would you mind doing the 23rd Psalm?
Sure. Adonai Elohim Echad,
Thank you, Rabbi Lever. We seem to have lost the sound from there, so we'll continue. Oh. Im chasid titchasad, im gavar tamim titamam, im navar titarach, ve'mikesh titpatal. With the loyal you deal loyally, with the blameless blamelessly, with the pure you are pure, with the perverse you are wily. You deliver lowly folk and humble the haughty. You light my lamp, Adonai. With you I can rush a barrier, I can scale a wall. The way of God is perfect. The word of Adonai is pure. God is a shield to all who seek refuge. So Stacy, I'm going to ask you to share a few words now. Okay, tell me when you're ready. Okay.
I'm the eldest, and he was the eldest, and he was my favorite person in the whole world. And if If you know anything about me, it's probably that. My father is my favorite person in the whole world. This is his favorite hat. And as far as I'm concerned, I lost him the day his career ended. He's never been the same since, and it's just been drawn out pain since then. And I'm so happy for him that he's now free because he deserves nothing but the best.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. I'm going to follow up to Rabbi Lever with the Hebrew of the 23rd Psalm with the English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, and restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of God forever. Mitchell was someone who didn't fear. Mitchell was someone who researched the world, solved every problem that he could, to learn everything that he could. And for him, he set the table for all of you. For those of you physically here and those of you spiritually here. He set that table to ensure that every one of you could learn and grow in the way that he desired to, so that goodness and mercy should follow him all the days of his life. And in Olam Haba, in the world to come, he dwells in the house of God forever. Robin, I'm going to ask you, now I'm going to make you bigger. I'll turn you around so everyone can see.
Okay. My father once told me, Robin, of all my children, I really thought that you would be the doctor. We were driving together alone and his comment surprised me. Really? Why? I asked. He answered with that smile that he gave when he knew he was up to mischief. And he said, I could guilt trip you into it. It is impossible to impart how important he was and how well-read, theological, and scholarly he was, or how hilarious and childlike his antics were, and how infectious he was in high-pitched laughs. So I will instead focus on a few personal stories. There was nobody I wanted to please more than Mitchell LeVine. He expected the best and taught us the importance of earning our acclaim. For my bat mitzvah, he told me that I should read all 7 Torah portions, and then I will truly have earned my pardon. So I studied hard, and I did read all 7 Torah portions. It was nerve-wracking, but I got through it, and he was right. The celebration was sweeter because I felt that I had earned it. Dad had a busy practice that kept him working late, and we were often in bed before he got home. But I never felt deprived at this time because spending time with each of us was so important to him that he would schedule our weeks around board games and Oscar-nominated films, and even my friends knew not to disturb our time together. It was perfectly understood when I would reply, I'm sorry, I can't hang out tonight, I have to stay home and watch a movie with my dad. One movie, however, that I have still never seen is The Madness of King George, about the aging King George III of England and his descent into madness. My dad was overly excited when this film reached theaters in 1994, and he took Stacy, Scott, and me to see it. But 5 minutes into the viewing, the film reel flipped off the projector and the movie went out. Dad was so dumbfounded that at first we waited for a long time for the film to reset. But when this didn't happen, he flew into a rage and stormed to the ticket booth demanding his money back and suggesting the poor kid working there to a tirade of what a terrible wrong had been done to him. Teaching us while entertaining us was the mission for all our vacations.
Road trips lasted 3 to 7 weeks, and he expected us to read about our destinations before we got there. We saw birthplaces and homes of famous people, and would drive around for hours looking at nothing but grass, while he would describe in detail every aspect of the Revolutionary or Civil War battle that had once taken place there. He divided all the United States, the territories, the protectorates, among his 6 children, and whoever state he was driving to at the time would sit in the front seat and help him navigate the description. He collected pamphlets from obscure places, and when we returned home, he made us sit with him and create a scrapbook of our adventures using those pamphlets. And since one of my assigned states was Florida, tasks were often imparted to me, particularly in the early years. His instructions were clear: 1 pamphlet per page, perfectly centered and straight, no cutouts or decorations, no creases in the plastic covering. It had to be perfect. Perhaps the best way to describe our relationship is by sharing a way I felt I let him down. I was a senior in high school performing the lead role in our school's production of Bye Bye Birdie, and Dad was extremely proud and couldn't wait to see me perform. I had already been accepted to Boston University, but I had still never been there to tour the campus. Getting me up there was difficult and costly, but Dad found a way. He was invited to attend a medical conference in Boston and was allowed to bring me as his guest. There was just one problem. The conference was on the same day as my high school musical. He lamented so much how he didn't want to go because he didn't want to miss seeing my show. But in the end, there was no other option, so Dad went to my dress rehearsal and flew out the next morning. He sat through my entire 4-hour dress rehearsal. And even though my family taped the show, and even though we had an amazing time together in Boston, I still couldn't get over the guilt of having made my dad miss the one thing he wanted to see the most. This next part might be inappropriate, but it's very bad. Dad was always pranking us. In my case, I always wanted to hug and cuddle with him, but Dad was not a cuddler. It made him uncomfortable. So every time I would hug him and squeeze him, he would pat me a few times on the back and then take my bra strap and snap it really hard. He found this hysterical, and I always hated it. But I would give anything to have him snap my bra strap one more time. I'm grateful that Madison and Alexa will have a beautiful memory of crazy Papa Mitch wrestling with them on the floor, sitting on their kitty chairs and nearly breaking them, or crawling into their tiny toy tents to play with them. And I will tell Brianna how on the last day of his life she said, "I love you," for the first time. She said it to my dad, and I know he heard it because he opened his eyes and looked right at us. Finally, nothing gave me greater joy than when Dad told me how proud he was of me with one word. Eric and I were newly dating at the time, and again I found myself riding in a car alone with him. He started confiding that he was worried about my brothers and sisters for various reasons that do not apply now, and this got me upset. I said, "Hey, wait a minute, aren't you worried about me?" And he looked at me with that mischievous smile and simply replied, "Nope."
Thank you, Robin. Psalm 103. Kirachem av al banim, mercham Adonai et yira'av. Ki hu yada yatzreinu zachor ki afar anachnu. As a parent has compassion for her children, Adonai has compassion for us. God knows how we are fashioned and remembers that we are dust. The days of a human being are like grass, they flourish like the flowers of the field, and a wind passes over them. But God's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, as we heard, Robin, as we hear of our grandchildren, to all the reverent ones endures age after age, unchanging. God? I'll step this way and you step over there.
Thank you, Rabbi Weintraub, Dr. Schultz, Rabbi Lever, who's with my mom and Baba, and Toby Wyman, David Cedros Funeral Home, Chapel Hill Memorial Park, Toby Wyman and Menor Manor, for allowing us to have this service in these most unprecedented times. Today we lay to rest my father, Dr. Mitchell Lee LeVine, a wonderful man, a gentle and kind soul, and a genius who cannot possibly be summed up in the few minutes we all have to speak to you today. For that, I would have you all read my sister Stacy's book about him when she is finally able to finish it. Today we are certainly providing the final chapter of his mortal life, but we are only scratching the surface of his legacy. My father was a man who was never bored. We all laugh about his OCD behavior, from the board games to the old movies, to watching South Park with me, even amongst his busy surgical practice. But this was not his only way of following his interests. It was his way of engaging with his children, either one-on-one or in a group. Family was by far the most important thing to him. He was always there for my siblings, shows or dance recitals, and yelling, "Yay, Scotty!" at my Little League games, and throwing the ball with me, even though he was no athlete. And it turns out I wasn't one either. So I say that my theater skills came out in the courtroom. Everybody else did theater except me. These last 12 years after his stroke were progressively more and more difficult for all of us, but I can't imagine how it must have been for him. While I choose to remember him as the man who taught me to ride a bike, taught me to drive a car, or should I say a gigantic 6-seater Ford Econoline van that we would proudly drive to hospitals and park amongst the other doctors' Lexus and Mercedes. I will also remember how hard he fought his progressive illness and the little wins we had when he could still speak some words to us and still show us his amazing smile and infectious laugh. On a personal note, I'm so glad he got to meet my wonderful fiancée Rebecca before he passed. I could tell he was proud and certainly approved. I am forever grateful to have come in this past weekend to see him before he passed. I saw him Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which was the day that he passed. I was able to tell him how proud we all were of him, and we were all going to keep making him proud, and how it was okay for him to go. He passed a couple hours later. My Aunt Sharon told me the next day that telling him it was okay was a gift. It was heard from someone he loved that he was committed to go. I never thought of it like that, and it really hit me emotionally when she said that. But I'm glad I was able to give him that gift to end his suffering and finally allow him to come to peace. He gave me so many gifts and memories throughout my life. I also believe that I may have been the last of us to speak to him. So I will sign off with the last words that I said to him. Goodbye, Dad. I love you.
One of the defining characteristics in my adult life is my extensive and enthusiastic, if not overbearing, social media presence. It's a form of expression that has always come naturally to me, #millennial, and something I am teased about regularly. But I have come to understand that a large part of my incessant posting and need to share about my life is a direct result of the impact of my father and his obsession with chronicling nearly everything in his life. In my apartment right now in Miami, I have boxes and boxes of high-8 tapes to be transferred to digital, all obsessively chronicling family vacations, performances, birthday parties, and so much more. He also obsessively chronicled milestones that were not his own, including the history of the world, of the Oscars, of the Beatles, of the Disney Vault, of classical composers. I remember him even listing all the original laundry detergents and sodas that were popular in the 50s. He wanted to remember everything. I've struggled to think of a story to remember him by that was emblematic of my relationship with him, but it's mostly flashes of things. Listening to classical music together at the end of the night on his lap, pretending that I cared about it, just so we could have the time together. The long drive home one time from a chorus rehearsal about an hour outside of home, wherein he gave me a highly clinical and scientific version of the birds and the bees talk, which was very uncomfortable and very informative. Going on rounds with him to sell Girl Scout cookies in all of the area hospitals, trying to keep up with his pace, running 3 steps for every one of his, and becoming the unrivaled Girl Scout cookie selling champion of my troop. His ugly green coat hanging over the kitchen banister as he sat down to dinner after a long day of work, where he'd tell us hilarious stories from his proctology practice. Yes, the Seinfeld episode is accurate. Proctologists have excellent senses of humor. To quote the Disney Pixar movie masterpiece Up, as Disney is often my go-to source of comfort, thanks to my dad. That might sound boring, but I think it's the boring stuff I remember the most. I struggled sometimes with Fada, as we called him, because he was very hard to impress. I was desperate for his approval, to reach and surpass the high standard he set for himself and for his children. But the older I get, the better I understand why he was the way he was. Beyond all else, he wanted his children to be interested and interesting. He was investing in us, and he did it through a strict regimen which insisted upon our knowledge of the world, of the arts, of history, and yes, of the original laundry detergents, hexagon games, Civil War ballads, the National Park Service, and who could forget the Hittite Empire. And more than anything, he invested in his children by showing up. Despite a busy and thriving medical practice, my dad almost never missed a school play, a t-ball game, a piano recital, a clogging competition, a speech contest. He was there for all of it, for all 6 of his kids. And he came home for dinner nearly every night to sit and have a meal with his family and, of course, blast opera loud enough to shake the house. Dementia is a horrific disease, and even more horrific for someone with such an incredible mind and who placed such intense value on memory. You feel helpless to know what to do, but in the 12 years since his stroke, and certainly in the last few years of decline, our family showed up for him. My mom went to visit him every single day, and we all came in to visit as often as we could. And I truly believe that this is what made him last as long as he did. The visits I had with him were some of the most challenging and meaningful moments of my life. He just kept showing up and helping him remember. The way we will show up now is by telling his story. I see it come to life in my fiance, Eric. With his passion for Star Trek and opera, his introverted intellectual mind, the way he doesn't suffer fools, the currency he places on learning, and his bouts of silliness. I wish he could have met my father in his prime, but I'm grateful that they got to have a moment together this past December at Menorah Manor, listening to opera and learning who each other is. I am also so grateful that the last interaction Eric had with my father was to ask for his blessing for my hand in marriage. He would have loved Eric. Together, Eric and I will make a life that honors the legacy of my father. A legacy of deep family ties, of learning, of Judaism, of caring for others, of being intensely passionate about all of your interests, and perhaps most importantly, of silliness. And I intend to chronicle the hell out of it on social media. I miss you so much, Father, but I can't wait to keep making you proud and keep showing up for the ones I love.
So many funerals. The words of Job speak to me. Talmid Chacham imet mimavi lano tamorato. That there is not a way to replace a person of wisdom. That we say there are mines for silver and places to refine gold. That iron can be taken from the earth and copper from the rock. But where do we find wisdom? Where is the source of understanding? Eze makom binah. Talmid Chacham imet. a wise person when they die. Mima Vilano Tamorato. Where can we replace them? And without insulting anyone that I've ever used that phrase before, it feels more appropriate here than it has ever felt before. Because the wisdom and the kindness, the Menschlichkeit and the silliness that were present in Dr. Mitchell LeVine is a rare combination. There is no other. You may say that we are all like the snowflakes, each a little bit different. But Dr. LeVine was something else. And we are all grateful for the gift of knowing him. Matthew, I want to invite you to share a few words. I'm going to spotlight your video and turn you around.
Thank you. So, tough acts to follow. My sibling, that is. But don't worry, I'm used to it. You have to get creative to make your mark as the fifth child. So there was a running family joke about how I was accidentally left out of typical milestones. The primary example being that I was taught to ride a bike at the same time as Leslie being 5 years younger. But don't for a second confuse absent-mindedness with neglect. I have zero memories of Dad missing any events from momentous occasions in my life, as my siblings also mentioned. For someone who worked surgeon's hours and also had an endless supply of personal hobbies and projects, he also always found time for play. So I am very early in my own experience as a father, but I'm already making a concerted effort to make time in my busy schedule to play with Luca. And I'll probably think of Dad every time that I walk through the rules of a new game when he's old enough to actually learn them. I know we're all trying to be brief here because there's so many of us that want to speak, and Florida's very hot. So I'll close with a simple anecdote that I believe epitomizes the spirit of the time. I don't remember the exact context. I don't remember exactly how old I was, probably a teenager or so. But I was in the car with him once, and we had our windows open. I believe the AC may have been broken. And we pull up to a stoplight. Car pulls up on one side of us, with windows open, blasts some sort of alternative rock music. Another car pulls up on the other side, windows open, blasting hip-hop music. We, of course, have been listening to classical music on NPR, and you probably already guessed who's next in the story. Dad turns the music up all the way, as far as it goes, to be cool. But more important to the story was the way that he laughed at his own joke, so hard that it was possible for teenage me to be embarrassed by the situation. So the message that I take away from these very simple moments is essentially, don't be afraid to be weird. Dad was by far the weirdest person I've ever met in my life, and I hope I can be half as weird as he is.
Thank you, Matt. Leslie, I'm sure this is not the first or last time you'll be called next.
Do it.
I offered you to go first.
To say my dad was an inspiration to me and my siblings is an understatement. I use that grammatically correct. Very upset with me. I think we have all pursued our paths in life with some credit to our father. If you know my dad, you know he's passionate about many things, far too many to cover. But one thing he loved more than anything was music. When I say music, I'm not just talking about music of his generation, though he was a die-hard Beatles fan and made sure that we all were too. I'm talking about everything from Gregorian chants to American folk music to rock and roll and beyond. For those who don't know, I'm a music therapist. I began my real musical path when I took up the bassoon in 6th grade band. I wanted to play the trumpet, but my dad told me the trumpet was, quote, too boring. Everyone plays the trumpet. Take something more interesting. I believe he suggested the bassoon, planting the thought in my head. Well, I looked around the room in band the next day and saw the bassoon, and the rest is history. I got into Florida State College of Music with the bassoon, and he was right. There are hundreds of people competing for positions for trumpet and flute, not nearly as much for the bassoon, and they're much more in demand. I pursued my degree in music therapy, and early on, when my dad began showing signs of dementia, I suggested music therapy to my mom, because music was something he continued to respond to. He would sing along to anything, even if he didn't know the words. He would hum along perfectly to any melody on the radio, including Lady Gaga. He responded beautifully to the music therapy sessions, and it provided an outlet for connection for him. As his disease began to progress and he moved into Manor Manor, he was barely speaking, and at the time music therapy sessions had halted due to the change. I remember bringing my guitar with me to visit him, just to see. I sang Beatles music, and lo and behold, he was singing along in perfect pitch. During the last week of his life, I Skyped with him, playing Beatles music, my husband playing his drums, singing to him, though he wasn't responsive. But I know he heard. And when I went to see him, the day before he died, I continued to play him music and sing to him, even though it was hard to sing through a mask. He instilled his love for music on me and inspired my career. And he will continue to inspire me for the rest of my life.
It is truly a blessing to have a bounty of children. To have 6 children, all of whom can speak so highly, can say such beautiful words and share such beautiful memories about the man who raised them. And we know Ellie, and we know Baba, and Steve, and David, and Sharon, and all the other family that is there, that his influence was not only upon his children, his influence was everywhere that he was. From Ben Sira it says that we are all destined to die, that we share it with all who have ever lived, all who ever will be. We cry for the dead, and we should not hide our grief. We should not restrain our mourning, but remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory be a source of peace to us, and be consoled when the soul departs. Because we know that death is better than a life of pain, and eternal rest is better than constant sickness. That feels so true and so powerful in this moment. As a drop of water in the sea, as a grain of sand on the shore, are our few days of eternity. The good things in life last but a short time, but a good name endures forever. And Ali, I want to acknowledge the caregiving, the responsibility of taking care of someone is all-consuming and exhausting. You have been so incredibly devoted to Mitchell that you were there for him morning and evening, helping to serve him meals and taking care of him every single day. That is a gift that can never be repaid. It is a gift that is filled with love and loving kindness. And now we are all going to participate in that gift by coming together to bury our dead. We're going to pause the service for just a few moments, and I'm going to ask, we're going to come forward one at a time. I have here with me, this is from Israel originally, but that Ali and Marilyn were able to participate in the burial. So I have here, and I'm going to put this on. Ali, this is yours. And Marilyn, Baba, you are making a difference right now. We say in the Jewish tradition that to bury the dead is one of the greatest acts of gemilut chasadim, one of the greatest acts of loving kindness. It is not in any way a show of disrespect, but the greatest respect that we possibly can do. And now I'll invite you guys to come forward. Do we have cups, or? David brought a shovel to
Yeah, we can do that.
do things a little more traditionally.
Why do you want to use
If you'd like a cup, or
I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm so sorry.
I thought I could hold it together, but I'm sorry, I can't.
You don't have to hold it together. You don't have to.
Ellie, you don't have to hold it together. It's okay. This is a totally appropriate time to cry.
Oh.
You're sanitizing the shovel between them.
See that? I miss him so much. I miss him so much. He's the love of my life. Always will be.
sorry.
El Mare Rachamim, Shochen Mamromim, Amtzem Menucha Nechana, Tachat Karhei HaShkinah, B'malot Kedoshim Utarim, Kezohar HaRakia, Mazirim, Et Nishmat Michael Lipa Ben Chaim Moshe Yosef uMiriam Shehalach Leolamo Began Eden Tehem Menuchato Ana Bal Harachamim Astirehu Beseter Knafecha Leolamim Otzror Bitzror HaChaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato Ve'yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavot V'nomar Amen.
Malay Rachamim. God of compassion, God of forgiveness, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Michael Lipa ben Chaim Moshe, Yosef and Miriam, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Bruce, one of Mitch's dear friends is here. I'll share just a brief word.
I met Mitch in high school, which means I've probably known him for longer than most of the people here. I met him when his parents bought the house on Park Street, and because I lived on the same road basically, we rode the school bus to school together. And I'm not going to repeat everything everyone's already said here today. I will confirm that he did love Knicks games, and some of my fondest memories are playing them with Mitch, sometimes getting my socks beaten off of me, sometimes the other way around, sometimes having heated discussions over the rules, but always remembering we were good friends and having a good time. One thing I'm sort of surprised I haven't heard anyone mention is that he himself was a very good performer. In fact, he was the one that encouraged me when we were roommates our freshman year of college to get into acting. It didn't take at first. It was 20 years later before I followed his advice and tried out for some shows, and now that is a major part of my life. And whenever Mitch would see me perform, sometimes he would not be complimentary, but when he was complimentary, I knew I had really earned it and it meant a lot. So I don't pretend my loss is as much as anyone's here, but I will miss my friend for the rest of my life.
Rabbi Weintraub,
Yes.
Marilyn would like to say a few words.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I've been listening to everybody. I haven't heard everybody completely. However, I'm going to ask everyone to send me a copy of their speech, and I'd appreciate that. I will read them and keep them. But in the meantime, I just want to say one thing that I called Mitch a couple of days just before he passed. And I called him on the phone in his room, and I talked to him. I don't know if he understood or heard me or awake. However, I told him he's the smartest man I ever met. And I meant that completely. And he was a wonderful son and father of his children. And he gave me wonderful grandchildren and great grandchildren. He was a wonderful man. I just wanted to say that. I like
Thank you, Marilyn. So after hearing from all of you who knew him and loved him for decades, what do I say? Do I speak of a beautiful love story of a brilliant Renaissance man, a husband, a father, a surgeon, an eccentric genius? I speak of a man who loved so deeply, who when I asked about his passions heard, it would be easier to say what he wasn't passionate about. Thanks, Stacy. Dr. Mitchell LeVine is one of the most extraordinary people I've met in my rabbinic career. And while my first-hand knowledge of him was limited, since the visits that I had with him were not the same as they would have been a few years ago, I've heard about him from his parents and his siblings, his children, his friends. And more than once, I heard him from Baba and Zadie, standing in front of Steve and David, two brilliant doctors, and telling me what an amazing Dr. Mitch was. And I always felt a little like, you can't see my face under this, but it was a feeling of compassion and love that he could speak that Zadie could speak that way, knowing he had such brilliant children in his family. And I know that today he's with Zadie, researching the history of the world, now with more primary sources and interviews. I don't know if they have onion skin paper and pencil in heaven, but I'm sure his handwriting is legible there. So I wanted to start with a reference to song, and following his format, I wasn't sure if I should discuss I Saw Her Standing There, the first recorded track on their first studio album, Please Please Me, or Love Me Do, their first single. Both seem relevant, both Beatles songs seem relevant to the love story of Mitch and Ellie. Other than the strange reference to us knowing what he means about her being 17, the former track tells us of that lightning-struck moment, that meet cute that the two of them had. 42 years ago, they literally bumped into one another. They noticed each other's brilliant blue eyes, passed on to all 6 of their children, and once Mitch realized that Ellie was, in fact, Jewish, their relationship blossomed. Their hearts went boom after they crossed that room, and he held her hand in his. So love, love me do. You know I love you, I'll always be true. So please, love me do. For the last 42 years, Ellie and Mitch loved deeply. Through thick and thin, through sickness and health, they stood by one another. They had different skill sets that complemented one another perfectly. While Ellie dealt with the practical logistics of 6 children in a bustling household, Mitch provided for the family while still finding time, as we heard, to create special moments and memories with each and every one of his children. As Andrea mentioned, he worked hard to ensure that every child had their thing. Leslie shared how that, while he could seem intimidating to some, he was so kind and funny to anyone who knew him. His devotion to his family was beyond words. Robin shared how he ensured that a 7th grade bully never bothered her again, and Scott spoke of hearing how the garage opened regularly in the middle of the night so that his father would come or go from work, caring for the community and his family. His eccentricities in ensuring that every game was played in order, every song listened to in order, every movie in order, ensured that every child could participate in the conversation. And his love of music and theater was shared, making sure that all his children could play an instrument and sing. His wisdom was known throughout the community. Steve shared about how at a fraternity trivia game, he once listed every king of England with a violent death, as well as the method of death, and the year of their demise. A Renaissance man, he was working on this history of the recorded world, and although we heard how he got stuck on the Hittites, the research and writing that he did to get to that point was incredible. Matt shared how he loved impossible and unfinishable problems because they would allow him to grow in his knowledge. And all agreed that his encyclopedic knowledge allowed him to answer almost any question. But most powerfully, he was not afraid to say, "I need to look it up." He would, and he never would forget what he learned. That quality is one that I pray all of us emulate. The humility amidst great wisdom and genius is important. Now, his wisdom in matters of faith was no less comprehensive. He studied Torah, and as we heard, encouraged his children to read not just a small section of Torah, but as much as they possibly could, if not the whole Parsha. And that story began not even with his children, but with his sister Sharon, who he encouraged to chant the Torah with the proper trope, something that wasn't so popular at the time. His children went to day school, ensuring, as Robin said, that when they got to college, they could be super Jews, even if they thought they were ordinary. I pray that every parent would show such devotion to their children's Jewish education. His knowledge of faith included studying the New Testament, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and maybe the Bhagavad Gita. Now, imagining a person with such wisdom, if I were to write a novel, I would probably create a more stoic character, but that wasn't Mitchell. When asked to describe him, the first word mentioned from Stacy was hilarity. Andrea mentioned both the intense intellect and purest silliness, a father who pushed them to exceed in their Jewish, music, and secular educations, and also was willing to go see a Beavis and Butthead movie. Humor was so ever present in his life. His laugh was so contagious it earned him free tickets to the local community theater for comedies, because the director knew if Mitch laughed, the theater would laugh. He loved a good prank, and he wouldn't punish you guys if it was funny enough. Now, everyone but Andrea, we heard, got locked on the Florida Trail and Alligator Alley, usually at dusk or perhaps even in the middle of the night. Somehow you escaped. But traveling across the country, we heard they did not go on traditional vacations, but went on research expeditions to arcane and archaic sites. Every child had a state, a country, a providence, a continent, a seven dwarf that they had to extensively research. Now, David and Steve shared so many memories of growing up together, of their music and book collection, comic book collections, and the strict rules for use, his vibrant personality. Sharon spoke of a meticulously considered letter, 4 double-sided pages on the importance of choosing the Jewish sorority. His surgical notes were unparalleled, and his meticulous nature made him one of the best surgeons in the state, if not the country. Now, of course, at the ice cream shop or the Coca-Cola museum, that meticulous nature meant things took a little bit longer. He was a remarkable man, a mensch, and the cruel illness that stole him away from us these last few years is heartbreaking. We know that he is now at peace. Now, Jewish scholars, especially the Rambam, have offered a multitude of visions for the world to come. In one of them, the world to come is compared to a great study hall. And the more you have prepared, the more you have learned, the more you can understand the lectures of the Holy One. Now, I am confident that if anyone can understand the lectures of the Holy One, it is Mitchell. But he won't just stop there. I'm sure he'll interrupt God and give a humorous anecdote to help ensure that everyone else can understand too. So the Beatles' final studio album concluded with Get Back. Get back to where you once belonged. Mitchell is back where he belongs. He's in Olam Haba, once again able to share his love, his humor, his wisdom, and his wit. His memory is a blessing for us all. I'm gonna ask you now to please rise, and we're gonna say the Mourner's Kaddish together.
Yitzgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah. Yamad yivraki utei v'yamlich machlutei. V'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael. V'galav b'zman kariv yimanu amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam amen. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shmei d'kedusha b'ruchu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushmachata v'nechamata da'amiram v'yama v'yimromein. Yehi shlama Rabbah min Shemaya. Chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimromein. Oseh shalom v'rama. Huya aseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimromein.
Amen. So at this point, I will remind you and let you know that this evening Shiva will be in just 2 hours at 6 o'clock, and then Mincha will be at 6:30. I had shared the information in the chat for anyone that's not there and needs it. If you're a member of the synagogue, you got this in the email. So this is the moment where in any other situation we would create 2 lines so that you would be enveloped in love. We would say to you, Hamakom Yanachem Etchem, that you should be comforted along with all the mourners of Zion V'Yerushalayim, that you should know in this moment that you are not alone, that you are one of many, that all across this world there are other people standing in cemeteries remembering those that they love, and that as a Jewish people we are standing there with all of them. We think of Jerusalem, our holy city, and we see the imperfection there. And we pray for a day for peace for Jerusalem and for peace in all of our souls. So I'm going to stop the recording at this point. I'm going to close the meeting. My condolences to everyone. And to all of you, my condolences to you.